inclination, the intuitive thing to care about are those that you are actively developing for. But the fact is that governments don't know best. This is illustrated in the mega cities created, corporations holding monopolies over big cities. We say that the voice of the people should always come first. 3 pieces of setup then. Firstly, what does the developing projects look like? This looks like 4 things. 1, you're actively trying to better the quality of life for the people that are living in those areas. And secondly, you're trying to increase the economic standing in these areas, trying to further prosper these areas then. And as that will only be able to progress your society and progress your countries more. And secondly, what do the people actively look like? They are the ones that are actively affected the most by these developing projects then. They are the ones that are going to be using these developing railways, they're going to be the ones using these airports, and they are the ones that should be prioritized in this debate. And they are rational adults and are the eligible voters that vote within the referendum. Therefore, we have to assume to some level of rationality of these voters, because at the end of the day, they are actively the ones that are going to be most affected, and they would know what they want most at the end of the day. And the issue in this debate is simple. This scope of the debate has to be in the instance of when the incentives of both parties, the government who operate these projects, and the people who live in these areas, newfound development, do not align. So this looks like, this is because the referendum only proves its effectiveness in the instance where there is a conflict on both the government and the people itself, because otherwise, everyone agrees, you think it's good, I think it's good, it doesn't matter. So therefore, what is our burden then? Our burden is to prove how we are better able to safeguard the people in this debate. Secondly, why having the referendum is good either way, even in the instance where both parties both mutually agree that having these developmental projects is good. So firstly, on the idea of having better, well-informed individuals within these nations, within these cities there. So why are we better able to have more well-informed and have better judgment voters there? So this is pretty intuitive, because in the instance where a referendum is in place, individuals and voters will organically have that sense of responsibility and power to do their own research by the virtue of to make the best decision they can within the areas that they're trying to have these development projects even exist in the first place. And this is likely because we say that these adults are likely going to be rational individuals that are capable of doing their own research when it comes to being able to develop their own cities, because their incentive is also to be able to have the areas that should.
Most people, when they're voting for general elections, barely read up on what a party's policy line is. Why are we not assuming they're going to read complex economic papers that explain the impact of a railway to them?
It doesn't necessarily take advanced level of economic understanding to be able to understand whether or not something will be good for you or not. Because at the end of the day, within these areas, these individuals have a vague idea of what they necessarily want. They want to have this expressway to be able to reach another city faster. They want to have these airports so they have better access to outside whatever it is that they want. So it doesn't necessarily take advanced economic understanding to be able to understand how these things will necessarily affect people down the line. It just takes the majority of individuals who are rational enough and who are understanding enough to actually do some level of research to be able to do these voting exams, because at the end of the day you would feel this level of responsibility, because even when you're voting for people in power, you still have that sense of responsibility to do some level of research. And we say that the people that are going to be dumb and ignorant to these are not going to be the majority of people anyway. So with this, we say that this is likely because they are likely going to be rational adults. And so what is the impact then? 2 impacts then. 1, it acts as a check and balance system towards the government then towards the people that are actually operating these development projects, because you still want these developing projects to actually occur. Therefore, these individuals on the ground that actually vote for these projects to actually happen they will still want to be able to cater towards the majority of individuals. And I'll further extend this on my second argumentation. And secondly, how they will have a more cohesive society down the line, because when you have people that are more informed of what's going to happen within your cities or within your own countries, then we say that these individuals will have a higher understanding of what it is going to happen within your cities, and have a higher baseline understanding of how your country will operate and how what your country necessarily wants for you, and those people that actually want to have these development projects there. So what is the win then? If you don't have this referendum, people will be completely in the dark about what goes on within its development, and with the select few people who actually know about it, which is not good enough on government side. Because therefore, we still at the end of the day will still be benefiting the majority by having them actually have more incentives as to understanding what goes on within their cities and what development goes on. And secondly, we say that by the time the government approves of a project that harms a minority group, it would be irreversible and there would be no opt-out mechanism that is in place. This could look like your government's approving railway projects that bypass the minority and are ruining their businesses. This could be different sorts of projects that actively harm the retail value of your areas. Then we still say that those are very real risks that could happen insofar as we don't have a referendum that actually has the majority of people voting on its correctness and appropriateness of the general area. So on a second argumentation then of how we are better able to have more equal development on the government side. So this means a couple of things. One, in lots of highly developed states, governments continuously funnel money into developing economic hotspots and economic hotspots even further. This looks like mega cities that exist within different sorts of countries, for example, Korea. We say that the issue with this is, however, is that governments oftentimes cause these locations to end up being extremely expensive to even further develop, and they often neglect those that are actually in need of these sorts of developing projects further. And secondly, a referendum can prevent that from happening in the instance where the majority of individuals will have a say in what goes on within its development. And this also ties back into my first argumentation of how this acts as a check and balance, because actively you would want the governments will have further incentive as to be able to help every single person in this society and in this area then, because you obviously want your power to continue and you obviously want to be able to be the best sort of governments that you can. And as a result, government now have to take other underdeveloped locations into account to appease more people. And why this is so good then is this proves further impacts. You're better able to improve the quality of life. You're better able to provide them further whatever. And why is this better on our side? The only form of solvency that opposition has is to its people, is to advocate for its assistance. And we say that this is ultimately symmetrical. We still say that we're better able to have this development and have people's choices be heard.
Thank you very much. Let's invite Leader of Opposition. Here.
Speech in 3, 2, 1. So, I don't have any rebuttal so far. I'm just going to start my argument directly. First of all, I'm going to bring up that this referendum in general is very inefficient. It's like all voting process in general, even in a country as Malaysia, which is counted as smaller than the larger states that are foreign, it takes a long time. It can take months just to vote. You have to send people out, you have to set up voting stations, you have to collect votes, you have to count votes, and then only can you start thinking of whether or not you're going to start building infrastructure. In that period of time where you're voting and you're collecting votes, we can miss opportunities. Deals with foreign countries to get materials, foreign investors to be coming over to start infrastructure, or even just the weather conditions. This leads to a long time to address public issues. Maybe people complain about a road, and then for that road to be changed, you have to set up referendum and start voting, and then it will take almost a year before you can even start working on that road. So issues like lack of hospitals, traffic congestions, or need of schools, such as that, will take a very long time to address, longer time than in status quo. This will impact the economy, especially because considering if you want to build, for example, a new railway or a new road, everything will take twice the time simply because you need to vote for every single thing that goes through it. My second argument is the cost. Referendums in themselves are expensive to organize. Planning the referendum, gathering the votes, putting up locations, setting up locations, and counting the votes, all of these things need money. There's a lot of financial and human resources that could be used to actually build the infrastructure. Instead of building all this money, you could be building twice the infrastructure, and instead you're going to half the budget for the infrastructure and take it to go make the referendums. This money that could be used to improve the country's economy by building infrastructure or just investing into things like welfare is instead taken to be used on referendum. And lastly, I'll put it up to public inexpertise. So for this argument, I'll link back the POI that the closing opposition did to the opening government just now, which is that people don't even research when voting for normal politics. What makes you think they research for it now? So what opening government said in reply was that it believes that the responsibility will go for this. So how does this tie into my argument? First of all, we'll state that most of the public is not in fact educated as an engineer. I'm sure most of us here don't have degrees in engineering or technology or know that much about the specifics. So why this matters and links back to the POI is because most people, when they think, they prioritize their immediate surroundings, they prioritize what will happen, what will impact them, not what will impact their country. And this is perfectly normal because people will naturally prioritize themselves first. So for example, if you're trying to build a new sewage system because the Longkang to Malaysia are getting overflooded, people will think about, but this sewage drain system near my house, it will smell bad, it will make the house estate, maybe the real estate's price will go down because people don't want to live near this waste area. So this leads to the public opposing it because they don't want to have this in their area. So this leads to the locals, this leads to the locals prioritizing their surroundings instead of prioritizing what the country does best. And that's my question.
Thank you very much. Let's invite the Deputy Prime Minister here.
POIs preferably for my background. So I'm going to speech in 3, 2, 1. A referendum, acting as a part of democracy, is inherently much more useful than the current projects and draconian system that status quo currently puts into place. How I'm then going to structure my speech is done very simple. On a few layers of responses before just elaborating a little further on the second argument that my first speaker brought up, before going into a third argument as well as weighing as to in order to box out the closing from today's debate of the backwards. So let's just go into a few responses. First of all, how exactly do people vote? A very simple layer of mechanization here. It's just that in these instances, right, voters are going to be compelled or held to a certain standard in order to vote for these projects to ensure that these things can basically pass easily. There's going to be time frames set for this. So any issue that is going to be regarding referendums taking way too long is something that isn't really part of the debate, but even if that is the case, I'll still tackle this even further. So number 2, as to why even if it does in fact take too long or there's logistical issues in the first place, how is it then we are still able to do better? First of all, let's understand that if you want to have a developmental project and that you are saying that it takes too long because a referendum exists, note the simple thing here is that if you don't get the referendum passed, then the developmental project isn't going to really exist in the first place. So any issue that's about being having these things clogged up for a long time isn't going to be the case because these institutions can just take that project and apply it somewhere else and try to get a referendum elsewhere. But even if that isn't the case, number 2, note that in status quo, in order to gain approval for developmental projects to even exist, they already take a long time. You have to get through standards and criteria that already exist. So I don't get why logistics is the main clash that comes up for 010. But let's move on to number 3. As to why the majority wouldn't be mad in instances where you vote in a referendum that's potentially disagreed upon, or why individuals will be more informed. So very simply speaking, a referendum is useful because even if you do in fact pass a policy and there's certain amounts of people that don't like it, you're still able to appease the majority because that is just fundamentally how democracy works. It's how a referendum works. It's way better than having no choice at all as compared to on-site opposition where you just have to blindly follow any form of manipulative policies that these institutions push out. So as to why this is then important is something that I'll elaborate a little further in my third speech. As to why, number 3, how this acts as a safeguard from corruption, as well as mismanagement and predatory projects. So, 1. Without the existence of a referendum, the only criteria that you need to, in order to get approval from the government, is just in order to build the project, is just getting approval from the government by virtue of things such as just appealing to them, proving that you follow the correct the correct regulatory standards and stuff like that. I don't remember what it's called. But the issue here is that 1, governments usually have pretty close ties with corporations in the sense that corporations are able to control and manage what capital okay, society is capitalistic. The government likes money. Corporations funnel money into the governments and governments decide, oh yeah, I'm gonna support them, so I'm gonna pass the referendums. I'm gonna pass these projects. But number 2, Because of that, these corporations, being avid lobbyists, governments need to take up the projects, and here is why it is exclusively through a referendum that we are able to use this as a check and balance against these types of projects. But let's talk a little more on what these projects look like, to give a little bit of illustration. One, developmental projects that are done to get money, etc. Or number two, just like haphazardly conducted projects that are passed just because the government wants the money. So why is it that the status quo is inherently worse than having a referendum? One, you can't really achieve change until a project is being built too late. Because chances are, without a referendum, you wouldn't even know that the project exists in the first place. But number two, as to why a referendum is better, is because it consolidates the power of lobbyists and protesters in order to in order to prevent these projects from happening. So for example, if there's like a very predatory project that I don't know, they are trying to build a railway system that's like really terribly built and it doesn't really benefit anyone, then you can use the referendums as a way in order to pass this policy to ensure that it just doesn't pass. But yeah.
So your check and balance of corruption is to have one party campaign using rhetoric in a local area.
That is not the case! Okay, so very simply put, the reason as to why we are able to ensure that these predatory projects don't pass is just simply because a referendum exists in order to act as a check and balance. Like these people on the ground can actually realize why this is going to be the case. But okay, let's just impact the second argument a little more. As to why it is only on side of government that achieves any form of solvency is that advocacy is symmetric on both sides of the house. I think we have to recognize that. But even then, it's even lesser on side opposition, simply because it's called advocates. Yeah, advocates don't really have a pipeline, they don't really have a way to actually have people listen to them. But a referendum is precisely a correct location for them, simply because it is literally a political campaign for you to commit into to ensure that the local area will actually care. But then let's move on to why it is necessarily true that voters are going to be well informed for these referendums, which directly tackles the extension that CO is going to bring up by virtue of the POI that they gave. So let's talk about why voter intelligence is better on side OG. So here's the thing. Even if you don't buy the fact that campaigning, lobbying, and whatnot is considered a useful form of information, let's talk about why even further, a lot of these referendums can act as a tipping point for individuals to actually understand what's going on in their local areas. So understand the reason as to why these people are more compelled to care for their local areas is because it's inherently something that is much more proximate and concrete to them. Think about it. Instead of if you want to argue voter apathy, the illustration here is very simple. People are apathetic towards voting in governments because they think that the government is a very abstract idea or is very far away or stuff like that, or they think that other people are going to vote for them. However, the difference here is that in these local areas, it is something that directly concerns the people on the ground themselves. It concerns these exact people, and they inherently have the incentive to want to actually care in order to, because the effects of you not voting for the referendum are very concrete. There's going to be a bad thing that's built in your place, or there's going to be a really helpful railway system that's built close to your local area. So it actually adds on to the incentive for them to want to learn about these things, and it also adds on for the incentive for lobbyists to try and push for these changes to occur. Because if it's inherently good, then it provides a net benefit towards these people. But if the project is bad in the first place, then you have a higher capacity to be able to voice out compared to on-site opposition, where you're limited to the specific amounts of resources that they have, which is from grassroots movements and protesters trying to fight for change, which we already have, which we consolidate. So that's why we say, side with OG. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Calling the Deputy Leader of Opposition.
Here.
Referendums are a waste of effort and time, and instead we should maintain status quo. A few voters towards opening government. He said that we said referendums take too long, but in status quo it already takes a long time for projects to come out, and this means that we're just going to take twice the amount of time then. We also talked to you about manipulative decision and status quo and corporations manipulating government with money. However, side gov themselves And Side themselves, status quo already takes a long time by going through standards and criteria. And historically, voters are also often down for money. For example, past paying voters. Moving on to my arguments then, my first argument is about oversimplified campaigns. So when these referendums are put out, it makes it easy for the public to understand. And this means that it takes away the informative part and the most important part. And it only leaves like the surface area so that the public can understand these projects. So why? Referendums often boil down to a simple like yes or no answer when you're asking these voters to vote on a more complicated subject. So for example, right, things like infrastructure development projects involve many like layers of trade-off. It involves economic growth. It involves a lot of things. And a referendum only reduces these to like just a yes or a no choice. And this just forces voters to make decisions without actually understanding the project or like engaging in the depth required to fully grasp like what this project is going to help with society. For example, if a city is working on the construction of a new airport, so the complexities include things like noise pollution, like job creation, environmental degradation, and tourism growth. So yet the campaign will only reduce it to a do you want an airport and or not. So this oversimplification just ignores the potential for like the mitigation strategies or even like a fully planned approach for these projects. So campaigners on both sides of the house will also cherry pick data that supports what they want to put out. Like for example, like they will downplay information that contradicts the projects from actually happening, and this leads to like oversimplified narratives that do not fully represent the complexities of the project. So in referendum campaigns, issues tend to get like simplified for easier public consumption. So like complex aspects such as how a highway project could reduce long-term emissions of short-term environmental costs. It will not be clearly explained, and as a result, so these decisions will only be driven by surface-level arguments rather than deep, nuanced debates, and this just leads to like a rejection of beneficial projects. Moving on to my second argument then, local opinions are more likely to refuse these projects. Like, for example, since referendums will give more weight to local opinions, which can sometimes block projects that will actually help and benefit the public. So this looks like, for example, a new airport could bring like things such as economic benefits and more tourists into the country. However, nearby residents are more likely to oppose it due to things like noise pollution or like the fear of increased traffic. So this means that these local objections are more likely to prevent projects that would benefit the larger region or country, as people tend to prioritize their immediate surroundings over broader public needs. So this means that local communities resist developments that we see as undesirable. However, even if those developments will actually bring more harm to public than bad. Okay, so this can block projects like, for example, housing for lower income groups, or like necessary infrastructure that will like disrupt the local lives temporarily but benefit society in the long term. So local referendums could lead to the rejection of projects based on their self-interest rather than interest in society and instead of fair assessment of societal needs. So what does this also mean? This also means that referendums in favor the majority view, but this can also sometimes overlook the needs and the voices of minority communities. For example, a new project might actually benefit unrepresented or disadvantaged groups in society, and such as like providing them with affordable houses or providing them with more improved public transport in like low-income areas. However, if the majority of viewers like they take this as they see it as an inconvenience, this project is since it's a majority vote, these projects are more likely to be objected and refused. This just harms marginalized groups who already lack the political and financial resources to campaign what they want effectively. And this also links to what my first speaker has already talked about in public inexpertise. So moving on to my third layer, we tell you that referendums is going to take so much more work and effort in order for them to actually be successful, because it requires a significant amount of time. It requires a significant amount of man effort and money, and that could also be allocated towards more important needs. For example, holding a referendum could drain financial resources that are better spent on direct public services like direction and things that are actually needed in society instead of wasting time and effort on these referendums. So with all that, please fight with opening opposition. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Calling the next speaker, member of CUP. Take care.
I will object. Is it okay if I speak at this volume?
Online
I cannot see my people. If I stand up, I cannot see it.
Are you short-sighted?
A bit.
Oh.
I'm too prideful with my glasses. Okay. Enough? Is that okay?
and
Okay, thank you. At the end of what has been a very shallow, one-sided opening half, let CG bring some nuance to the debate. Propose 3 components in my speech then. Firstly, on some responses to the OO push, before proving to you specifically at every point how we differentiate from our opening and giving you one main extension on how people will become more literate in the long term about civil studies and about politics under government exclusively. And this is a vertical distinction that is notably distinct from OG because this extension is so important around me, specifically because we are going to benefit people regardless of whether or not they like the new airport or shopping mall or Bollywood that comes out of the referendum. So firstly on efficiency and the idea that the people will with someone that an individual will vote against a long-term things that affects on a personal level. These are the only 3 things that we have from OO. Firstly is on efficiency and logistics and how it's going to take a while to establish the referendum in the first place and then even longer time to actually build the building. First of all, I don't really understand why this is an urgent issue, right? If they do want to push logistics, they should probably have knowledge to frame that this is going to be an urgent issue that people need to solve now. But I don't understand why this is something that you need to do now or instead of in 10 years when the highway or the road or the Bollywood is probably still going to take 10 years to build. People probably don't want to rush an infrastructure project regardless because rushing an infrastructure project means that the project is likely structured unsound or it's just not safe for use, so people probably don't want to do that in the first place. And the point at which they are able to decide on this decision in the first place, that is already the point where a lot of the harms that come from waiting a long time for this project to be seen through is already washed out. But then the delta simply is that they have something that they get to agree on for this project to be realized, because at the point at which that happens is the point at which they really benefit. But then secondly, when they talk about the individual who will vote against the Longkang because it affects them on a personal level, right? Because the Longkang is smelly, and even though they want to solve Malaysia's sewage problem, they still don't want to build the Longkang. So here's some weighing here, because on the interest of the people versus the well-being of the country, right? We think A is prerequisite to B, that the entire principle of existing in the Northeast is getting the true things that happen to you, even if it's something that benefits, even if it's something that might end up being slightly detrimental to the country on a larger level. We think that especially at the point where it's something that affects you directly to the largest extent, it's something that you care about, it's something that you should get to choose on. Even if you just really don't like the Longkang because it's smelly, we think that you have the right to not vote for the Longkang because it's smelly and you don't want your house to stink. We think that it's a perfectly valid thing for people to want, and we don't see a problem with that. But we also want to directly contend with OO on bad campaign because this comes out late in the round, but this really only works if the outcome is negative. As long as both OOG and OO don't want to contend on whether or not the outcome is going to be positive and negative, I think the closing half is actually going to contend on this. But I'm going to engage with CO first because in your POI they talk about how people won't care about political elections and won't want to do their research. And Chanil says that you don't need to be an econ scholar to vote on this, right? I want to expand on this in my extension. They talk about how only under government are people actually incentivized to learn about these things and to educate themselves and become more politically literate. But also I presume that CO's case is going to be our outcome, right? Whether or not people are going to like the new infrastructure that is established in these industries, whether people are going to like this new infrastructure or whether or not they're actually going to be content with the outcome if they vote based on showy campaigns and people who make false promises to them. We tell you that regardless of either side, government is still going to benefit. So I want to differentiate from OG very clearly here because Chanil and Small tell you 3 things. Firstly, that people are affected most by these policies, and so they should get to decide. Secondly, that adults are rational enough to be able to make decisions. And thirdly, that governments don't know what the people want and they're likely to make underhanded decisions with private companies otherwise. Notice, I know 2 things. Firstly, OG only benefits people who be CG is going to be the only side that benefits people regardless of outcome, whether or not people like the new infrastructure or it's good for them or not. We tell you that if it's good, then they ultimately benefit regardless. That if it's bad, they're still going to educate themselves on the outcome. So, OG only wants to debate in a world where the outcome is good, right? When they don't really tell you if people are going to regret the decision at the end of the day, we are going to extend on this. So, one piece of agreement here, because the opposition counter culture is not really talked about, right? On how governments are going to establish infrastructure on how governments are going to establish agreements with infrastructural companies to be able to carry out this agreement.
by government, I don't see how it's like really relevant. So I tell you, private companies are able to lobby to governments to establish projects, and the projects are easily abandoned when they receive large amounts of public scrutiny. I'm going to be talking about this in extension. So this is a vertical one, but it's really important because we affect people regardless of outcome. If people like the new infrastructure, then the benefits already manifest because they make collectively agree come together and make a decision that they are like majorly content with. Because if a large amount of people don't like the fact that the long-class system is smelly, then they're probably still going to benefit from that, even if they do suffer from sewage clogs. We think that as long as that is something that they personally weigh over suffering from sewage clogs, then that is a decision that they should get to make regardless. We end up under the idea that people like these things, that there's going to be more willpower behind these projects, and that's going to be like beneficial overall. Because now companies cannot suddenly back out of these projects or just like drop the projects entirely when they already started on them because it looks bad and they won't be like the projects won't garner support from people the next time because these companies are going to be seen as flaky and they're going to be seen as like half-hearted in these contexts. And that specifically means that they're going to be more committed to do these projects in the first place to make sure that the benefits are realized for people on the ground. But then let's talk about how even if people don't like it, right? Because this is government's at the very worst case, and we're talking about how we still benefit here. If people are not satisfied with the result, it's likely that they think the results that they don't want this to happen again because they are suffering directly from the effects of whatever harmful policy that they put. If I go out the if I vote down the local system, right, and then my toilet gets clogged, then I'm going to be like, hey, my toilet is clogged, I don't like that, I would rather deal with this smelliness. Then I would think next time in the future, right, and this is something that people get to do again, but they get to make the referendum and they get to vote again. That's specifically at the point at which people are incentivized to educate themselves about the details of the infrastructure projects that they are approving or denying so that they can make good decisions about what is happening to them. Two reasons why this is the case. Firstly, proximity, because you are the one who is using the boulevard, who is using the sewage system, who is using the highway, the road, and the toilet. That means specifically that is why you will personally want to care about these things, you will want to do better. But then secondly, the debate is simply just about people who care about the infrastructure in the first place, because if you didn't care about this information enough to make the change on it in the first place, then you probably just wouldn't really want to vote on these things regardless. So in terms of literacy and transparency then, because we think that people are less apathetic about development now, because now they vote count for something and they are able to make a difference. People are incentivized to become more literate as long as they want to get better, but they can't, but they feel apathetic under option because they don't feel the individual power to make a change regardless. But then on principle, because we think people deserve to vote on things that directly affect them, whether or not the decision is good regardless. The government is like rarely affected by the infrastructure, but the people are affected most directly. This means that there's like imbalance in there's imbalance in how people are affected here, and that means that people who are affected the most should get to choose on what happens to them. Because the imbalance in responsibility means that people deserve to know what happens, deserve to be able to access these things. But it's the comparative here is that simply under opposition, there is no ability for people to stay literate about these things because they literally have no incentive to care, and things that happen are just not good for them, and they are uniquely powerless to stop it under opposition. What this contribution does to the ground is that education, and the ability to benefit regardless of the outcome is exclusive to CG, and that is why we did a papers. Propose.
Thank you very much. Calling member up. Here.
I think CEO comes in at a very opportune time in this debate. So at the point in which opening is starting this dialogue on logistics and what's going to keep the most time, and CG comes up with their extension as to how they get more people to read economic text, I think we are the ones that are actually able to come in with a new reframing of what the debate actually looks like. Because I know, right, if you read the motion, it reads that you would rather all of these developmental projects be passed through a referendum. What it means is, referendum acts as a direct stand-in for things like parliamentary checks and balances that already exist in status quo. That is to say, when you pass policies through a referendum, you no longer need to pass it through a system of parliament in which you propose the bill, and then people advocates or MPs from different states and counties vote on that, because it was a direct substitution that let the people have the most power. Therefore, the CEO's case is not dependent on the outcome as to whether people like it or not. We posit this process in a whole was negative for the country itself and for its capability for development. So, two extensions in my speech, and then all of the responses are going to be integrated, right? So, firstly, as for how the other side of the house removes accountability for bad decision making. So, 3 layers under this. Firstly, no, people on the ground we think are only willing to understand things like the direct implications or the short-term implications of things like policies. So we think that individuals look through the short-term, they probably don't consider like the economic implications in the far future, as how this airport is going to drive up my grain sales. We think people like farmers on the ground probably care about the fact that this road cuts through their farmland and directly like harms a bit of their like money-making ability. We highly doubt that like voters are going to do so much research, like OG talks about, right? That probably, well, sure, you might do like some preliminary research before the general election, or I think most individuals are quite busy enough with their life to the point at which things like a new sewage system probably doesn't take like providence over the fact that I need to work in my job the next day, I need to go to all these meetings, etc. So like the point at which people like barely even do research for general elections, we think it's fair to say that they need to prove to us why this is the tipping point at which individuals all of a sudden are going to become politically active and are going to become politically articulate. I think the reason for this is simple, right? The point at which referendums did things that didn't directly impact your life. So if I don't travel on that specific highway, I probably don't care that much about it, meaning I'll just probably vote, whatever everyone else votes for, insofar as long as that directly impacts me, I'm not going to read that much about it, right? But furthermore, here's the comparative, right? We already had certain representation, so it takes out the OG push on like democracy, insofar as you already vote in an advocate, for example, an MP that has responsibility to do well insofar as they're direct representatives of you and your county and your hometown. So what this means is we're able to get all these protections. But secondly, right, the second layer fits the entire OG and CG case. Because the reason why politicians opt into these developmental referendums in the first place is because the easiest way to gain popularity at the end of things like election cycles. So that is to say, these projects are concrete signs that, oh, maybe I've done something, regardless of whether it's good or bad, it shows that you've done something more than all the other politicians. The reason why this is directly harmful is that they cannot guarantee that all these projects are going to be beneficial in its nature. So for example, they cannot promise that you're going to build high-speed rails that connect the rural village to the big city. Really, it's going to look like, in Malaysia, when they look like big city connecting to big city, that probably wasn't necessary in the first place, but made them look very good on paper because they buffed up their resume. But furthermore, right, the easiest way for you to get things like public opinion and critical mass on these ideas is by doing things like convoluting the details so that people are less likely to pick them up. So what we see in the status quo is politicians actively doing things like, making their documents very hard to read, so you get a bunch of economic professionals to stack up on your paper and draw a bunch of fancy graphs people don't understand, which then forces the public into a situation where they're opting into your rhetoric instead of what your policy actually entails, insofar as the opt-in barrier is very high on their side of the house. So note that this means that the entry barrier to whatever literacy that they want to talk about becomes extremely high to the point at which the literary design would be impossible to read. Like, have you actually tried in a UN document? It's 60 pages, I don't know what they're talking about. There's so many graphs and stuff, I don't understand it. Even as a debater that wants to take active research, we think that people on the ground that already have jobs, already have families to feed, are even less likely to care about them on their side of the house. But here's where I want to engage on CG, right? Because their extension is, that these people are going to learn things on both sides, whether it works or not. Because, they're suffering, that's what they want to talk. Two responses. Firstly, I think suffering is something that's equivalent on both sides of the house, right? But it's made by people above you, insofar as it's still the government that operates these referendums, it's still the big parties that are going to campaign for them. So what this means is, on their side of the house, really individuals equally had no advocacy to create change in the first place, insofar as they still felt disempowered, right? So I made a bad decision, and now it's completely my fault because I voted for it, because of much more harmful rhetoric on their side of the house. But you don't have to flip this entire idea, right? So this is when you allow things like further bad decision making. So when you're desperate, when you realize you made the wrong choice in a referendum, this is when things like other malicious politicians are able to come and say, hey, I'm going to fix this entire idea for you, and implement further ideas that sap resources for your community. So you see this in Malaysia, right? So after your magic, you voted in Mahathir, which is probably not the best idea, but it was done in the fact that they had blind faith, right? The idea that they made promises to fix what the previous administrations have done, that probably they didn't get any create change in the first place. But here's the positive comparative counting. Two aspects why the parliament is much more effective in this referendum. Firstly, there's parliamentary checks and balances. So that is to say, because there's so many people from different places that represent different ideals, we think that's how you're able to get things like more accountability. So note, right, on their side of the house, accountability for bad decisions falls on the public for making this choice and the government for enacting it. On our side of the house, what you're able to get is accountability for the MP that proposed thing in the first place. So if a bad decision, they're not able to sway the public by just giving good metric. They have to genuinely give a reasoning as to why certain things occur. Before I move on to the point.
Okay, so if local referendums are catered towards local areas and you want these people to be able to give you a proper decision, why is it then that you're going to have it have a high barrier of entry? Or why is it then that these politicians are going to just be rhetorical visions?
Because the easiest way to sway people is with rhetoric. Why would I spend so much time dumbing these papers down for people to understand when I can just tell them that everything is going to be great, and then like everyone else is like blocking my progress, right? We think that we've already seen success. Like look at the success of Donald Trump. The success of Donald Trump proves that rhetoric is an effective tool in swaying public opinion. We think it's simply unfair for them to assume that all of a sudden I want to cater and teach the public economics. As a politician, I want to do what maximizes the utility of my political capital. Three impacts here. Firstly, we think use up government resources for like speculative benefits. So on their side of the house, you're harming your capacity for things like other decisions to be made. So like by governments, things like building airports in like major areas. We think the roads that they build or the railways that they build aren't as useful as they're going to say it is. But secondly, right, we think you get things like corruption, right? So OG tells us that companies control these politicians. We think it's exactly the same on their side of the house, like even person. Think so far as you allow these people the capability to do things like get paid off by private companies, to create referendums and directly send it to them. So in the status quo, checks and balances come in the form of things like tenders where they have to apply it as a pass through parliament. On their side, how to skip this check and balance entirely and go straight to whatever the politicians have to say about you. But lastly, right, I think it's when you create things like, rifts in society, things so far, as a lot of rhetoric comes under things like populism, a lot of rhetoric comes under things like, discrimination. So the easiest way to sway people is to tell you that others are like destroying your ability to create progress, right? So I think it was on their side of the house we created the most funds for voters. I think for Canada was simple, we perpetuated equality, we perpetuated a simpler way for individuals to be able to opt in, and for all these users to see. Thank you very much. Okay.
Have you heard I just got in?
Yep.
Alright, let's different your eyes from being from CO. Start my speech in 3, 2, and 1. For the same reason Donald Trump is allowed to run for president, even though he's probably the least intelligent person to ever grace a television screen, we allow people to make decisions based on the fact that it is their will and it is their voice that should be heard and should be listened to. Opening's problem is that they assume that the outcome is set in stone. OG tells you that the outcome is definitely going to be good. OO tells you that no matter what, the fact that the referendum takes so much money is not worth it. CO's problem is that they want to assume that corruption is something that's completely mutually exclusive to the side of CG, and they don't want to explain to you why things get better on their side, other than the fact that, people are just going to be making decisions and they're actually qualified because they read an econ paper. Before I move on to taking down house by house, I think we have to start with CO first. Because note, right, CO makes a lot of false claims. So firstly, they tell you that there's more accountability because you can just hold the MP who proposed the policy accountable. No, there's less accountability when no one knows who is proposing, right? If there's no transparency on it because people are not aware of the project until it is proposed, there is less accountability because people don't know it's happening. I don't understand the problem of more accountability when you don't actually know that the project is happening until it has been carried out by the private company that was contracted. But secondly, they tell you that people get taken advantage of by politicians and they don't actually want to do their own research. This is why the outcome is likely going to have a higher chance to be good, right? Firstly, the fact that developmental projects often contract private companies means that private companies also have an incentive in order to make sure that these projects are good. Note that this is new analysis panel because private companies often get profit from the projects that they carry out. For example, if I build a train station, I have to make sure it's good or else people won't go to that train station and buy those tickets. But secondly, if governments want sustained success and they want to be elected election cycle after election cycle, then they have to make sure that the projects that they ensure are things that are going to be high quality. Note that people are not stupid, right? No matter how much politicians want to bully me with rhetoric, if I know that the longkang is damn smelly, I'm not going to care if the person who is proposing it to me is speaking John Jungkook. But secondly, they tell you, this is the nuance nuance, and this is how we differentiate from politics. Because no, many of the parallels they draw are to current day modern politics, and in the way that we give the chance to people to elect their, why we shouldn't give the chance to people to elect their president, because Donald Trump uses rhetoric to influence, right? This is why it's different. There's less way to muddle things for developmental projects. When you're talking about things like structural integrity, when you're talking about things like developmental projects and like whether this road should go through this way or that way, right? The reason why Donald Trump can use so much emotional rhetoric is because most of his campaigns are literally about immigrants and literally about whether we should or we should not vote for Kamala Harris. In this scenario, you're not talking about Kamala Harris, you're not fighting Kamala Harris, you're talking about a long term who can't say anything back, and that is why you can't use emotional rhetoric, and that's why you can't do things like mudslinging. We think it's extremely different then, and if they miss the nuance of this debate, they miss our entire case about why it encourages people to become more educated. But let's just weigh it off, right? Because we say this is the only way they can get educated, otherwise there's no incentive. We've already explained to you why currently that going to be taken advantage of by private companies who lobby governments. In the long term, it's still the best thing. Even if there is going to be no referendum, you cannot ensure that people's stupidity won't manifest in other ways. And that's why it is so important to ensure that people won't be stupid, and there's an incentive for people to continually become more and more aware about things like developmental projects. But just like to note here, they're telling us this extremely funny claim that people won't do research about things that affect their own lives. Brother, this is not an econs paper. This is not something where I debate and it's something that's so distinct, like so separate from me that I can just look at it on the screen. This is a long time that I can look every day I come out of my house. This is something that directly affects me, and it's something that therefore I'm more incentive to care about. Because I'm more incentive to care about it, it's likely that I'm going to do more research about it, and that is why I'm specifically going to do my own research and become more educated, and that is the incentive that is something that our hinges upon. But onto all that, I think they've been very simply washed out by OG already, but let's just take this one step further. I'd like to ask the final one question, right? If democracy was supposed to be technocratic, and if all decisions for citizens were supposed to be made on who was the most qualified, then why is the president not the most high qualified person with a PhD in urban tech and poli-sci? For the simple reason that just because the people's will is wrong does not mean we should discount it. It is the same reason as to why just because someone's decision is bad does not mean that you should discount it. We tell you that the fact that it is bad does not mean that they have to be excluded completely. Because the only way you can get people actively involved in things like politics is if you actually let them have a say in the way that things are carried out. But lastly on all, they also talk a lot about oversimplified campaigns. They never prove why this is bad. In fact, oversimplified campaigns makes info more accessible. And secondly, they can't spread misinformation, by the way. They can't do things like say that this longan is going to be 3 feet tall even though it's 6 foot. They still have to give basic facts because otherwise, once the project is being carried out, they're going to lose their credibility. We've told you multiple incentives as to why these projects are supposed to be carried out with the full honesty on the manifesto. For the simple reason that these impacts are things that you can see in daily life. You can't use things like rhetoric to explain away the bad effects on the environment or the bad effects on your culture. So what are the unique extensions we bring into this debate? Before that, any points? 3, 2, and 1. So what are the unique extensions that we bring to you in this debate? Firstly, we tell you the obligation of people to know and to be actively involved in what happens to their own country. Note that all of our impacts outweigh OG because we tell you that it's independent of outcome. So if OG provides no mechanism as to why the impacts are definitely going to be good because people are going to be rational, we're going to take it one step further and say even if the impacts aren't good, why we still benefit people in the long run. We explain to you the obligation for people to be actively involved in the way the things in their country are carried out. We explain to you why they have the right considering that the most impacted and the most affected by what goes on in society. But secondly, we tell you how it will make people smarter in the long run. Note that this is also independent of outcome, right? Because it's most important because it doesn't assume that people will be fully rational. It is not contingent on people making great decisions. We say that regardless, the fact that you create a social norm, that people are more actively involved and therefore take a greater step towards being aware of the things that are going on around them is the most biggest impact here. We also gave you incentives as to why even if the econs paper is 50 pages long and filled with words that I don't understand, the fact that it is there for the same reason that university information is hard to access, but private companies like EduQuest provide you research and things that you can pay for in order to be more accessible because they want to make money. Private companies are also going to be there to provide you with clearer information. We tell you that we prevent predatory companies by explaining to you why there's more accountability. OG's problem is that they never have a mechanism to explain to you why policies are going to be 100% good. OO had the reverse problem. CO had the problem of proving to you why corruption is not going to be mutually exclusive. We tell you that the well-being of the public is more important to them in the long run. They're not going to be stupid. If they value a sacred tree and you build a walkway through it, they are going to value that over anything else, not just a check. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Calling the final speaker of the day again.
Let's go, love it.
Our case was not contingent on the fact that corruption was mutually exclusive. It's the fact that you open up the risk that makes it easier for governments to abuse it is where your case fails in today's debate. Now, before moving on to my weighing and how we change this debate, just a few rebuttals towards OG. One, you're more able and capable of developing nations, and this also deals with what I think CG is also trying to push, right? Now, they say, let's just take a comparison of likelihood. What? The average voter, sure, even in your best case where they do all their research, they do whatever they want, they're still not going to be it's the best way for politicians to take control of these people is to convolute the information. So that means that if they do take the obligation to go towards this and really opt into this, I think that Ethan has already told you that they'll be convoluted and they won't really understand what is really going on with all these economic benefits that could actually help the country. Two, you have to understand that the only way for these people to vote is based on rhetoric, and why emotional rhetoric will exist, well, I'll bring that up later. Versus, as opposed on our side, where we have a parliament where there are already existing check and balances, and there's also economic workers who dedicated their lives to help these countries, to help their government, and to help their government. Now, just dealing with CO, right? They say that the governments won't know what the people want, or that this representation of having referendums is the best way for them to get what they want. We say that is not exactly true, because there's also still customer sovereignty in a normal market, and it's not exactly going to be entirely on governmental control when you have these developments. There's still going to be private companies that exist. The only difference in these private companies is that on our side of the house, these private companies will want to innovate. They want to appeal towards these parliaments to be able to take control of these projects, and they will have to be approved by the government. And two, their entire house will only be gathering on resources to go into these parliaments and say, oh, please give us the opportunity to actually develop this, because we're giving you money to bribe you and giving you money to actually go into this. And even if these private companies weren't going to bribe these governments, we say that corruption still is such an easy gateway for these parliaments, because in times of needs where these MPs, these people need to have power to have over their people, they'll always use this contingent of like, we're doing more referendums for your local area, they're infinitely better than the other party, which will create an emotional rhetoric for people to fight against each other and eventually create rifts in society, which I think takes down CG's push. Yeah, sure.
As an average intelligent voter, which is more important? That John Jung-kook is hotter than Jimin, and that's why I should vote for John Jung-kook's party, or the fact that Longkang is going to go through a sacred tree that I've visited every day of my life?
Sure, okay, even if they want to push that, it's in their certain best interest to actually go and vote for these, we say that there's still always going to be risks in society, because you can't assume feasibility that every single intelligent voter would want the same thing, because they're still always way over their own things, way differently based on what side they're on, right? So let's just take this into example. If I wanted to like take this down this longkang or like whatever, but like you also have like another person who needs this area to be able to farm. They're obviously still going to fight even if it's in the best interest for the society. There will always be risk. You can't just do this, and they've never given us any alternative for this. Now, moving on to the narrative and how we managed to beat out our opening party. Now, we've already impacted this debate in 3 ways. One, people are unlikely to take account. For example, referendums on colony design. People live selfishly. There's no way to see long-term benefits when they only see the short-term benefits in sight for themselves. And these referendums allow these people to skip parliament, which Ethan has already said, and it's in the best interest of the politicians to take control of this. 2, the politician is on the behalf of the government, and they aren't held accountable if you skip through this check and balances of parliament in status quo. So there's more corruption. There's more corruption for this. And 3, we say that the benefits that come out from opening house is extremely speculative. Because 1, if you want to guarantee that these average voters will have the intelligence level to be able to do it, we say that it's a speculative benefit as opposed to a likely benefit of going through this parliament and check balances. Why? Because even if the government doesn't take into the best interest of the average voter, we still say that it's a more calculated decision than what the average voter wants. Because they will have to go through multiple stages of parliament as opposed to just one voting session or one political campaign that lets these people take control of these grounds and of these grassroots. Now, moving on to my way. How we beat out OG and why we are more likely to materialize our benefits OG is because 1, we proved to you how check and balances are able to exist more on our side of the house. We think we win on this way because OG's only attempt at trying to have check and balances entirely relies on public opinion or public cohesiveness for this to be able to outweigh what our check balances and status quo is. And for them to actually be able to create such a cohesive check and balance for all these people to agree on one thing, you have to disprove why there will be risks in society, which I think they failed to do. B, why manipulative policies aren't as important is that OG actually has more corruption and manipulation on their side of the house when they use these gaps for corruption to open, and we say that we've already said this in our member speech. Now, moving on to why we outweigh CO. So people, their entire case is based on convention of voter intelligence. Sure, even if you take your best case where people are empathetic, we say that you have MPs who have an incentive to actually care about their local area and give reasons for this government. Why do MPs actually want the incentive to be able to represent their local area is because they usually want to rise up above power. So look at MPs like Hannah Yo. They actually have the best interest of the actor. They have the best interest of their area to be able to combat this corruption, to improve their local area themselves. Now, moving to our clashes, right? Check where we win on check and balances. 1, application. Whereas you have more people in parliament that locals actually doing the research, where the metrics are higher. And 2, why rationality isn't feasible as not everyone is an economic genius. And even if they were, they wouldn't dedicate their entire lives to it, as opposed to parliament who have dedicated their lives to it and stuff. So that.
Thank you very much.